Great music video. But again, this is the problem that we're working on today for Excel or for linear programming. So I have the problem we're working on looks like this, where we have a linear program 5. And I've just copy and pasted that table right here into Excel. And so what we want to be able to do is define our variables, define our objective function, and define our constraints. So our variables, I'm just going to copy and paste this right below. And these 9 variables here, or the slots, these are going to be our variables. All right, this is going to be equal to the number of bushels. This is X1, the number of bushels we sent from Mount Dora to Ocala. This will be X2, Mount Dora to Orlando, X3, Mount Dora to Leesburg, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is our define our variables. Now let's define our objective. So we are looking at total distance in bushel miles, which is equal to the sum product of our miles between each, comma, the number of bushels we send. So we get bushels times miles, so we get bushel miles. And this here is our objective function. All right. Now let's think of our constraints. Okay, so the constraints we have, first we had the constraint that all the number of peaches or bushels that we have in Mount Dora need to be shipped out. Okay, so here we have X1, X2, X3. So this is going to equal the summation of X1, 2, and 3. Okay, and that has to equal to the number of bushels that we send out. So let's call this our supply. Okay, and this is equal, it's just 275,000. Well, how many do we supply from Eustis? 400,000. And from Claremont, 300,000. Okay, so those are all the right-hand sides. I can just copy paste this left-hand side down, and I'm going to put these in brackets to let me know those are some constraints that I have. All right, so here's X1 plus X2 plus X3, and that has to equal 275. X4, X5, X6 has to equal 400,000. Next, we have our capacity constraints. So the capacity of Ocala is 200,000. The capacity at Orlando is 600,000. And the capacity at Leesburg is 225,000. Okay, and those are our right-hand side for the second processing type constraints. Now we have X1 plus X4 plus X7. And we get those, and now here's our next set of constraints, our processing constraints. So now everything's set up. Let's go to Data, Solver. My objective is to take my total distance and minimize that by changing all 9 variables. The constraints I have are my first supply constraints. So that is X1 plus X4 plus X7. But I can highlight all 3 of these because all 3 of those need to equal all 3 of these supply constraints, just like I have on my piece of paper. The next is the processing constraint. So the amount that I send to each processing plant needs to be less than or equal to the capacity that each plant has. I click OK. Make sure they're non-negative. Simplex LP. I click Solve. Change these to make them look a little nicer. But there we have our answer. So from Mount Dora, we take 200,000 bushels, we ship them to Ocala. The additional 75,000 we ship them to Leesburg. From Eustis, we ship 250,000 to Orlando, and an additional 150,000 to Leesburg. And Claremont ships all of theirs to Orlando. So looking at this, we see that Ocala is at its capacity, Leesburg is at its capacity, but Orlando is not at its capacity. So let's run the sensitivity report. And one thing I can see from the sensitivity report here is that for each additional bushel that I want to send from Ocala, it's going to decrease or rather, when we think of Ocala, that's our processing plant. So if I can increase the capacity at Ocala, going from one additional. So right now Ocala can handle 200,000. If I want to have that 200,001, it's going to reduce my bushel miles by 27. If I want to increase the capacity at Leesburg, it decreases my bushel miles by -8. If I want to increase my capacity at Orlando, it's not going to cost me anything because Orlando, or it's not going to reduce miles anyways, because Orlando is below capacity. Now, if I want to increase the amount I'm supplying in Mount Dora, so instead of 200,000 or 275,000 bushels, I want 275,001, it's going to increase my miles traveled by 48. To increase my supply at Eustis, well, for each additional bushel, is going to increase my miles by 30. And Claremont's going to increase my miles by 20. And so that is helpful in looking at the sensitivity report of how many miles it's going to affect as I change the capacity as well as if I change the amount I ship. Now, one question to ask is, well, if we want to increase the capacity at one plant, which one should we choose? And immediately we might think of, we want to increase Ocala because that's going to increase our bushel miles by 27. But we don't actually have the information to answer that question because while we see the benefit, we actually don't know the cost of what it takes to actually expand the capacity at each processing plant. But let's suppose that the expansion at each processing plant was free, then yes, we would want to increase Ocala because each additional bushel we allow Ocala to receive will decrease bushel miles by 27. And there is our answer.